I will never forget, it was 15 years ago, and I was grieving the loss of my grandfather. Sitting at work in an office with my executive VP, your typical company executive, gray haired, middle aged white man from Texas with a charming personality, stern demeanor, slightly robust in stature, deep southern accent, and dressed in his dark colored business suit. It was performance review time, my performance review. And although I did not feel like being at work, I had used all 3 of my bereavement days and knew his only concern was that I had returned. As we went through the different performance review categories, you know them: communication, collaboration and teamwork, problem solving, analytical ability, etc., I found myself listening but not listening, repeating over and over in my mind how sad I felt, how much I missed my grandfather, and why this man couldn't see my sadness and just send me home. Needless to say, the performance review went on and on and on. I scored above average in each category, but I wasn't moved. As the review went on, I continued sitting there, barely hearing the words that were being spoken. My sadness began to grow into anger, and all I kept repeating to myself was, please end this torture already. You see, at that time, I was a human resources manager, more like a senior generalist, with an HR team of one person, me, responsible for all New York locations with about 300 employees. The remainder of the HR staff, mostly higher level, were based out of our corporate headquarters in Connecticut. Not only was I the only one in New York, I was the only person of color on our entire team. When I think back, I was actually one of only 2 blacks that were considered to be in somewhat of a management position in the organization. So my performance review finally came to an end. I was so relieved. My VP says that based on my high rating, I was eligible, wait a minute, for the maximum increase of a whole whopping 4%. I said, okay. Then he asked your typical end of performance review questions. Do you have any comments? Do you have any questions? Is there anything you would like to add? I couldn't think of a thing. Finally, I thought of something pretty cliche, especially coming from an HR professional, and I said, it's a pleasure working for the company. Then he looks at me and pauses and says, you know, Monique, you don't know how good you are. Wait a minute, I said to myself. Did this man just say what I think he said? I was at full attention then. My sadness that turned to anger immediately turned into me having a real sister girl conversation in my head. I mean, literally, with questions and answers. Girl, did he really just say, oh, yes, he did. I had a complete conversation within a matter of seconds. I mean, I saw my head doing a 360-degree turn to see if there was anyone to my right, to my left, or wait a minute, maybe someone had walked in the room and was standing at the door. I had to make sure that my executive was speaking directly to me. But I got it together. I quickly composed myself, and although I had that brief moment of disbelief of what I had heard, my posture, my body language, and my facial expression remained completely unchanged. You see, it's not that I didn't know how good I was, because I most certainly did. I, like most women who were taught to be seen and not heard, most women who were taught not to overtalk, most women who were taught not to dominate conversations at work, we were taught not to ever act in a way that would make our superiors perceive that we actually thought that we knew more than them, even if we were the experts. Who was taught to always be respectable in a passive, assertive sort of way. And the deal breaker We were taught to never, ever allow ourselves to be perceived as the stereotypical angry and aggressive Black woman, especially in the workplace. So I, like most women during that time, was afraid to be authentic, afraid to be who I truly was, afraid to show too much intelligence, too much intellect, afraid to overtalk or to say something that would make my superiors look at me in any way with discontent. You see, this was long before the Me Too movement. This was at a time, although highly debatable by some, that America, our land of the free and home of the brave, to me, an undercover, but not so undercover, patriarchal society, hashtag number 45, did not fully recognize strong women leaders, strong women leadership, especially women of color. Did you know that research clearly shows that women are less likely to speak up in meetings? We're less likely to negotiate salaries. We're less likely to negotiate job offers, promotions, and why? Oftentimes, it's because we feel that it's inappropriate. We should be happy just to have that entry level or mid-level management position. We often felt afraid of losing our jobs if we spoke up. As a matter of fact, it has taken us hundreds and hundreds of years with slow but not always steady progress to have the courage to open our mouths and say, me too, to say we matter. It has taken years of cognitive dissonance, constantly fighting our own thoughts, beliefs, sometimes culture, the way we were raised, what our parents and our aunties and our uncles taught us, that we are women that deserve more, that we as women deserve equality, that we as women will no longer be afraid to be our authentic selves and have our voices heard. What if we were born fearless? Could you imagine living in a world where gender and racial equity, equality, and inclusion were societal norms? How beautiful would that be? We would really be singing Beyonce then. Who runs the world? Girls. Who runs the world? Girls. Did you know that according to the Center for American Women in Politics, Rutgers University, in 1971, nearly 50 years ago, there were only 3% of women who served in the U.S. Congress, 7% served in statewide elected positions, and none in state legislatures. Today, in 2020, prior to the current election, we have 23.7% women serving in the U.S. Congress, 28.9% women in statewide elected positions, and 29.3% women in state legislature positions across the country. Post-election, those numbers, I'm pretty sure since November 3rd, have now risen. In addition to that, for the first time ever in the history of the United States, we have a woman vice president. That's right, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who's also a woman of color. Now, in early 2019, there was a study conducted by Korn Ferry which indicated that the percentage of women in C-suite positions among the top 1,000 U.S. companies by revenue was at 25%. That's slightly up from 23% in 2018. And of that 25%, only 6% were actually CEOs. So although progress is being made, we still have a lot more work to do. Now, I realize I digressed a little from my performance review. I left off explaining that the executive VP, this Texan typical company executive, middle-aged white man with gray hair, said to me, "Monique, you don't know how good you are." Well, something inside of me sparked. All of a sudden, I no longer cared about values. I no longer cared about being inappropriate. I no longer was fearful of disrespect. I no longer feared losing my job or sounding like the stereotypical angry Black woman. I simply stated, as calmly as I could, Well, if you know how good I am, why doesn't my salary reflect my work? The silence in the room became awkward. He looked at me somewhat in disbelief. I could imagine the conversation he was having in his mind. But then he paused, he sighed, he hesitated, and then said, Monique, you're right. I'm not going to give you a 4% increase. I'm going to add an additional $10,000 annually to your salary. At that very moment, I seemed forced, but I became fearless and never turned back. Sheryl Sandberg says, lean in. I say, lean in, stretch, and then reach down and grab your sister's hand. We can no longer be fearful of what ifs. We must move fearlessly in the why not. Why not me? Why not us? Why not women? It is not time to face everything and run. It's time to face everything and rise. Zig Ziglar. We must face everything and rise understanding that being fearless isn't the absence of fear, but being fearless is merely having the ability to keep moving forward in spite of. Thank you.